Welcome to another episode of the Burn the Ladders podcast. I'm your host, Michael Fahey, and today we have a very special guest, Josh Bryant. Josh, I've heard about you since really I was working on Westside vs. the World, as I started to delve back into the world of powerlifting. So talking like 2014 through kind of 2016. That was where the bulk of that was. And back then, sort of what you seem to be known as, at least in the circles where I was seeing you, was that you were some sort of bench press guru. It seemed like all of the really big raw benchers were somehow, coming from like your camp. And now as, a decade later, transitioning into more the world of training athletes and whatnot, I see, you're always posting about hill sprints and you're doing loaded jumps. And so as my winding path has kind of grown and progressed in this industry, it seems like every time I sort of turn my head to see what's going on, you're in sort of the thick of whatever conversation seems to be sparking my interest. So all that said, I'm very excited to actually now have a face-to-face conversation with you and get to know you a little bit. So I guess to start with,
I'm excited.
What is your, what's the sort of basis or your perspective of training? What kind of like school of thought do you sort of stem from?
We kind of go. Can we go over I'll go over my background a little bit.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Kind of real quick. So I started off. My background is at about 16. So I started working out at 5 years old, not knowing what I'm doing. I just snuck into the YMCA because I watched pro wrestling and wanted to look jack. By about 12 years old, I actually got a doctor's note and could work out there more seriously. 14 years old. This is all for football and looking strong, big, all that stuff. Then 14 years old, I get to have a powerlifter named Steve Hall, who was my dad's friend, took me under his wing, and he was a very high level powerlifter for that time period. He was kind of on the tail end of it at that point. And from there, I started working at a gym that was a hardcore bodybuilding and powerlifting gym at 16. I was like, after football practice on weekends, I was the manager. So what I had opportunity there to work with a lot of people, like, so before it was like, I knew personal training was kind of a thing, or strength coaching. People knew I'd worked out with Steve, so I started writing programs for basically a lot of convicts and like those kind of people come to the gym. So I started writing programs for a lot of bouncers from the local strip club, huge guys. So that everybody knew I'm like writing programs for these guys.
At like 16?
And it kind of transpired from there. So at 16, so played, football, track, boxing, all that stuff, and then some powerlifting. Played 1 year of college football. But even at that point, I was strength coaching at 19 at a school in California. So I'd be, in the summertime, I'd come back and run their strength conditioning. And I was maybe even 18. I know some of the kids were like my age. They didn't know I acted older, but they were, a couple of kids that were held back and things. So that's where we kind of were. So from there, went on, did powerlifting stuff, became the youngest person to bench press 600 raw, did the strongest man in America, won that, totaled 2294 in a full powerlifting meet. Kind of got into more. So then I got into more like just training athletes. I worked for Doc Crease at UCLA. You were the football team in 2004. It was like an internship. I just kind of went down there, talked to him one day. They said, show up on Monday kind of deal. There was no paperwork, no nothing, just to learn. And then from there, I went to Nashville, Tennessee. That was training some athletes, but like the higher end, kind of like, think like, Beverly Hills kind of client, you're in Florida. So like higher end Miami kind of clientele. And then from there, went to Metroflex here in Texas, the most hardcore gym in the world, they say, and was working with all athletes for a long time. got one of the kids from the local schools, the athletic director had hired me at one of the top programs around here to train his son. So he gave me a job then as strength conditioning coach at a high school here. From there, I was doing the business on the side and the strength conditioning at the school. And I just was the business was going so well. I eventually quit the school and just did that full time. From there, got into more strength athletes and bodybuilders. So like you think like the bench press thing and all that stuff and top strength athletes. From there, from my own, so I got done powerlifting and bodybuilding and all that stuff myself and competing in strongman. People saw that I was doing a lot of stuff because I was like, I'm no longer competing here. So I want to be more, quote unquote functional, doing
Mhm.
hill sprints, things like that. And so from there, I started working with a lot of tactical populations and stuff, not by like seeking the market, so to speak, just because, I'd show myself doing it. And people say, hey, I want to do that kind of thing too. So from there, I'd say right now I work with, still strength athletes, got, a lot of world record older powerlifters because I do think strength's the basis for everything. So I'm not going to ever give that up because it is the base of everything, the mother of all qualities, as they say. But have had a chance to work with a lot of regular athletes, tactical athletes. Now that my kids are, sixth grade and fourth grade, training them, training a few of their friends, things like that. So here we are.
All right. Um, and
So,
you've worked.
and then, so my philosophy, go ahead,
Oh no,
cut out
continue.
for a second. You cut down for a second.
No, that's all. That's all right.
So
Continue.
basically, people that I've kind of, when you say my philosophy, I've written a number of books, about 25, and 2 courses for ISSA. So in the process of that, I had the chance to, so when I was in that gym situation, I met Salaria, the owner of ISSA, with Dr. Fred Hatfield, and
Mhm.
they kind of, I started doing stuff with them. And in the process, I got a chance to, I already read Fred Hatfield's book, but he edited a lot of my work and my books. And we ended up doing like 25 seminars together before he
Mhm.
died. So that I'd say he's my number one mentor. We kind of,
Okay.
so that's kind of where we're at now.
All right. Um, yeah. So that whole idea of I'm always fascinated in sort of uh, the inner logic or math that like governs someone's perspective. Again, so like with me,
Hmm.
I'm from. I put it on my Twitter profile. Like I'm unapologetically conjugate. I met Louis
Right.
Simmons when I was 12. Grew up like that heavy West Side influence and sort of that idea of, you can even see it within my work with, all the OVR stuff is that idea of training different speeds, and sort of developing those different qualities over the same micro and macro cycles. So bringing everything up in
Hmm.
conjunction. Um, and to that point, I also uh, famously or obnoxiously say, when things are true, they repeat. And uh, one of the
That's a good saying.
examples, yeah, one of the examples that I always use is, uh, you know, um, it- both because it backs up sort of that conjugate background, but uh, again, in looking at like your work, I always say,
Mhm.
I explain to my kids all the time. A kid will be over there blasting like biceps in the corner and, never turning their arm around and hitting triceps and wondering like why their
Sure.
biceps won't grow. I'll talk to coaches all the time who, say track coaches who want to just technique their way through every speed conundrum and, shun the weight room and to point out basically that idea that, the body wants to grow sort of in unison and to point out like in the case of big benchers they'll
Well, hold
uh
on, stop you real quick. Listen
yeah.
to him, kids, because that's exactly what happened right there. Is when I got with Steve Hall, that powerlifter, I was exactly the kid you're talking about, and literally went from one summer benching 235 to going to 285, and that is somebody. I was 14 years old, but the thing is, I'd been lifting like religiously, semi correctly from 12 on. So that was the difference, is just we basically reversed the volume of biceps to tricep. Go on.
Yeah. But that whole idea, like, because good, any good bodybuilder sort of knows that like you're not going to, whatever your weakness is, you have to sort of build up like the complementary uh component. There's not a whole lot of guys with giant biceps and lacking triceps. Um, Likewise, you know,
Right.
whether it's again, just like watching your feed, I see plenty of deadlifts, and any like anyone who's known for their big bench who ultimately gets to that north of 600 level, you find that
Mhm.
like all those big benchers have an affinity for deadlifts. Even I think even Mendelssohn has said before, that and I think like even Jimmy Kolb they've each said one of their best bench accessories was deadlifts. You know, Neither one of them are known for their full meat performances.
Right.
Um, and likewise, uh, that with you know, so to see within your training, I guess, like I said, to see the hill sprints, to see the heavy lifts, and see that even for the thing that you get so much praise for, that sort of you're always like tending to that full garden of the full force velocity curve, sort of
Mhm.
developing, even when it's a strength athlete, developing them in this holistic manner that allows every trait to ultimately grow and sort of express to the highest level. Um, but so, anyways, that's just one of the reasons that I started taking particular, note of you, and
Well, I
it
think the
being.
same goes for me too. It's like a lot of things of what I do is I'll just like, so for example, you've done the belt squat marches,
Mhm,
waddles, whatever we call them. And so I've done those, like I used to mainly do those with duck handle. I've done those for like since like, 2000 or something, mainly with duck handle. I started doing it the way you're doing it more, but I was never going heavy enough. That's why I reached out to you initially to ask
mhm,
about it because, hey, I don't think I know everything. There's some things I can do better. So, okay, I'm already doing this. How can I make it better? Well, you seem to be like the master that's kind of popularized it. Okay, so, we gotta load that sucker up more than I have. Cause I mean, you're right. Like, you don't know how heavy you could go. It's like one of those
yeah,
things of like, you just adding, okay, like you just keep adding a plate. Well, it was hard, but I had another one. It really wasn't that much harder. And it's sort of like, cause that thing I always did initially was just to kind of build when I got back into like higher volumes of sprinting and rucking and things like that. The only thing that ever lacked was sort of like never an injury or anything, just kind of ankle, like dull soreness all the time.
mhm,
And once I started doing those again, kind of, revisited those. I was doing it on the, I don't know what, it's not a pitch shark. It's like I guess it'd be most similar to a winning belt squat. It's not a winning belt
mhm,
squat. I bought it off somebody. I have no idea who made it. It's a very nice one though.
yeah,
And I'm on there too. And then, cause I used to do them, the duck walk, like strongman. I had done it the way you're doing it. Then I got back into doing those. But once I got back to doing it, saw your feed of doing it that way again. So I'm going to give that another go because and it really helped a lot. So initially the machine way helped a little bit. This way helped even more.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm just, not, I'm confident what I'm doing, but part of being confident what you're doing, knowing when you can, learn from somebody else.
mhm. Um, so, what, what does your training, what does your training look like? And I guess how, what are the big sort of like philosophical pillars of what makes, in broad strokes, what makes your training, your training?
I would say, my training would be mainly is, again, like was under the tutelage of Fred Hatfield. So a big thing is the principle of individual differences, kind of really working on customizing it to each person that I work with as much as possible.
Mhm,
I would say one thing, like how it could be different from other people's, is I'm really big on, so one thing I've gotten better at doing is sort of working with, I would say I don't, I always say you don't marry a periodization model, you date it. So I'll like
mhm,
use different models of what fits the situation. For example, like I think like with block periodization, one thing people go wrong is if I think there was a study I saw one time that said if you basically, work out with about, an eighth or ninth of the volume that you were previously training with, you can kind of pretty much maintain to a degree of
Mhm.
what you were doing, but that's not gonna take you to the next level. So I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is what I would do differently is go through more phases, but not, like how the conjugate would do somewhat is like never lose that what you built. So like for example, if you're trying to keep your aerobic capacity up, if you're a tactical athlete and we're really more focused on strength, since you already have that good baseline going, we might do like, 2 rucks a week, 45 to 60 minutes, heart rate between 120, 145. And that's sufficient enough to kind of stroke that aerobic base and keep it going, but you're not going like next level. You're not going to max, the
Mhm.
AFT that way, but it's this way. So kind of touching on everything at all times, but in a more phasic set. So I'd have like that focus on what's different or what we're actually focusing on, but then conversely, you know, touching on those other things. So I think another thing would make a difference is some of the more like I guess we can talk about some of the more unique methods that I use that I think that other might be more should touch on is like big on compensatory acceleration training. So the difference between that and so like
Mhm.
quote unquote conjugate side type of speed would be um that's like a specific adaptation you're after, specific and speed, percentage, what however you're tracking it. I guess with your like OVR devices, you could like, be real dialed in and I'm between this speed and this speed or versus like 45 to 65% or whatever you're doing. But the thing is with compensatory acceleration training, like how kind of Fred Hatfield, he talked about most of it was in the training zone is the term he used between he would call that zone between 55 to 80, 82.5%.
Mhm.
So, but that didn't necessarily, matter so much as the intention. So like well, a lot of the adaptation in my opinion and observation is driven by the intention. So for example, if you get a lot of speed strength adaptations, if even with a heavy weight that's moving slow, if the intention is there to move it fast, it's not a one to one, but I think you get a lot of those adaptations. So I'm real big on compensatory acceleration training throughout the spectrum of, you know, heavy, moderate, et cetera. Another
Mhm.
thing that would be different is I really believe strongly for most people is I like to implement strongman events. Okay.
Mhm.
So I think that is like, as Fred Hatfield used to say, he wasn't as big on those. And that was actually one of my, proudest achievements that people wouldn't know about is convincing them that they're good because we used to do the seminars together and we'd hang out all weekend. And so he used to say, there's good, better, and best, and he classified, strongman events best. So I'd call like your loaded marches that to me that's strongman. So I guess that would
Mhm.
be, there's nothing more. I would say there's nothing more functional than picking up a heavy weight and moving with it, kind of thing. So I think I use strongman stuff. I've even used it like with bodybuilders and stuff to a degree because I think so there's that part about it that would be unique is using strongman training for functionality. I think for a lot of people I'm dealing with, so you're dealing with a lot of athletes. They
Mhm.
come in, they've moved, they haven't lifted. I'm sort of dealing with that too, but also dealing with people that have lifted that haven't moved. So what the strongman events do is they bridge this gap between the powerlifter living in bench, squat, deadlift box, the athlete that's moving all the time. So that what that does is a strongman, why were weights invented? Weights were initially invented to slow you down a little bit because it's the resistance. So the strongman events get you actually moving. So if I said, all right, as you know, one of the biggest predictors of, speed, explosive power is strength to body weight ratio. I pretty much say at this point, that's about irrefutable. Almost everybody agrees on that part. So let's say you're a powerlifter and you deadlift 700 and you weigh 185 pounds. I guarantee you, you will be fast. Probably without any training, you can just express it right away. But your hamstrings are not going to have the resiliency to tolerate that stress they haven't been, used to. So you're going to tear something. So what a strongman event does would kind of like give you that basis to go from, okay, we're going to get from just moving and living in this little box to actually moving because now we're doing that movement resisted. So that's why I
Mhm.
like a lot of the hill sprints, sled sprints, sand sprints, all that stuff is resisted because it's like a safety. If you're not like an actual like athlete that has to display, you know, say you're an explosive dude, you just want to get back into like, middle age, you want to get back into some sprints, you're really explosive. If there's a if you're 40 times down a tenth of the second because your cadence is not perfect because you're training sand, who the hell cares? Great. I mean,
Mhm.
that's good enough, right? I mean, training for a track meet, you're not there's not a scholarship on the line as a running back. So just live with that, maximize that. And you know what? In real life, that's going to be so far ahead and, really lower your chance of injury. So that another thing I'm really big on is rucking, you know,
Mhm.
weighted carries, loaded marching, whatever you want to call it, with like, so basically just throwing a rucksack, weighted vest, do that kind of stuff. I think what I like about that for the aerobic conditioning aspect is, for one, if you were a novice, you potentially could actually, maybe build muscle from it. Like studies would show. I don't think, people listening to this that are actually lifting hard are going to start rucking and, be ready for the bodybuilding stage. But, there's something to be said there. For
Mhm.
two, for people like that are not like, moving a lot, not running, not all that stuff, you're no longer introducing a new movement pattern because you're literally walking with weight on you. Everybody has to walk, so it's not like you're introducing, oh, well, now we got to get your Achilles a condition for jogging, say, because you don't ever jog. This is just
Mhm.
adding a little bit of load to what you already do. So I'm really big on that. Some of the more unique strength methods I've used, I think that again, like talking about people might be interested the way we use a lot of isometric work differently than a lot of people do it.
Mhm.
So what I like to do is, for example, is I can send you some videos on this after too,
Yeah.
would be if somebody has like say a sticking point in a particular lift.
Mhm.
I mean, this could be used, buddy, but I mean, it's pretty CNS intensive though. What I mean by overcoming isometric is, so like say for example, um, you guys go on YouTube, look up Johnny Jackson isometric. You see the pro bodybuilder that also won the Raw Unity meet in 2011 for powerlifting. And what I do is, like for example, his sticking point was right at the top of the deadlift.
Mhm.
So he pulled as hard as he can against the pins for 6 seconds,
Mhm.
and then at sticking point. So then so that's already a little bit unique. But what else I do is after that,
How many
you
reps
rest
of
for a
that
few
would you
minutes.
do?
You got 3 per sticking point. I wouldn't really do more than 6 period in a work 5, 6 in a workout if you had a
Okay.
couple. So 3, you get a huge, and again, this is one of those things of, whoever, a lot of times when people say, "Hey, you know what? If you half-ass it, you half-ass results." I would say this is one of those things that's not the case. You're not gonna get any much results at all if you're not putting forth like a real maximal effort there. The
Right.
idea is you're at that sticking point, so you encounter it. Once you encounter that sticking point, you pull as hard as you can. So isometrically, you're going to produce about 15% more force than you can concentrically. So you are producing super maximal amounts of force at that point that you get stuck at. Psychologically, physiologically, I guess too, is once you encounter that sticking point, you're like becoming more aggressive. So I think when you have to pull a maximum lift and you encounter that sticking point, you become more aggressive. That's going to be good for like the physiology, psychology, if nothing else. So the kicker here is after you do that isometric, you wait a few minutes, then you go into a compensatory acceleration set. So say like, 60, 70% max, you would do after in the full lift because we want to get that transference of not just getting super strong because, in those old Russian textbooks, they said that was like the problem with overdoing isometrics is you kind of like, mess up the entire movement in theory, especially, I guess a conventional deadlift's not very complex, but sure, certainly on like a clean or something.
Mhm.
But you want to get that transference. So like if nothing else, it's just a built-in safety net. Hit the isometric as hard as you can, go into it. And so like your loaded marches, there's definitely some potentiation there. So you're pulling this super maximal force, wait 3 minutes, and then you pull over there. You should feel faster on the deadlift after. You should feel more explosive on the deadlift because those sets are like, usually like singles, maybe doubles. So we're not trying to fatigue whatsoever. It's just about moving the bar fast after there. So then chill out, do it again. That sequence back and forth about 3 times for that sticking point.
Mhm.
So that's a really good way for bench pressing and deadlifting. I haven't used it as much on squat, but it's worked tremendously for world records in both bench press and in deadlift.
Mhm.
Also worked really well for overhead pressing. So here's one more thing on that. Besides attacking that sticking point directly, and hold on, I would not do this for more than about 6 weeks. After that, it kinda wears off. It's one of those things of, like, after that, say there's no overtraining, no nothing like that, just no matter what, just seems to lose its effectiveness, and I
Yeah.
thought that. Then I read in one of those Russian manuals that Elite FTS used to sell as translated, bound up ones, and
Mhm.
it said that in there. It said about 6 weeks. I'm like, "That's exactly what I'm observing."
Yeah.
And so, it was pretty cool to see that they thought that too. But the other thing that's cool about these isometrics is they're really good for really strong people that have taken a break and need to get
Mhm.
back fast. So, like, you were, like, previously, like, a world-class, say, powerlifter, bench press, and, you're kinda in the gutter. The isometrics, because of the super maximal force, there's something like program your nervous system or something. I don't know the exact mechanism, but they seem to bring you back really fast to where you were, or at
Mhm.
least close to where you were. Example being guy Al Davis, he benched 670 raw, highest bench in the world in 2011. And he took some time off as a masters lifter, so he came back in 2015. And he hadn't been doing, I mean, I think he'd been doing like a little bit of recreational lifting, but nothing serious. And
Mhm.
so he's like, I just want to kind of see where I'm at today. Like, cause we used to do our bench group every Tuesday night. And, like, people have been texting him for, like, finally we'd given up, like, "I don't know what's up with this dude," and, like, he'd never responded to anybody, then he just shows up at the gym, and he's like, "Okay, I figured you guys would be here." It's been, like, 4 years, like, yeah, whatever, so he's like, "I just wanna see where I'm at," so he goes in there, 1 plate, 2 plate, just going like 1 plate at a time. At 4 plates, it didn't look too good, and he's like, "I'll just do a few reps." I said, "I'm gonna do, like, 3 reps at 5 plates," and, I mean, I had to, like, deadlift that weight off him, it did not move. And he's
Mhm.
like, "Well, actually, I came back because 'cause I'm doing that." Now he's a masters referring to that masters bench press competition in Houston, and I need to be ready like in 13 weeks. I'm like, okay. So I remembered there's no plan going into this session or anything. He just showed up, so I had no idea he was even coming. So I remembered the isometric thing about how well it worked for him before when he had that sticking point at the lockout in the bench press, and so use that as instead of just at the lockout, a 3 point, like right off the chest,
Mhm.
right in the middle, about an inch or 2 from the top. And he did 628 at that meet, and 13 weeks later, but now as a master's lifter and taking all that time off. So then I've done that with a couple other people. It really brings strength back. So I think that would be unique. I think also some of your listeners would be more like the West Side. So I've been doing all raw powerlifting, so no suits or anything
Mhm.
like that. So the differences would be of what we're after is they're going to be focused a lot more on top end strength. So say like on a bench press, they're going to be way more focused on the lockout,
Mhm.
even on squats. So for us on bench pressing raw, the name of the game is going to be power. Power off the chest. It's almost like if you can push it fast enough off your chest, in a sense, you can almost outrun those sticking points if
Yeah.
you move it fast enough, and that's kind of the goal. But obviously, you
You
need
gotta
strong
build your own
triceps
bench
and all.
shirt.
You got to build your own bench shirt, upper back, power off the chest.
Mhm. Yeah. As you talk about how fast people come back from, using things like isometrics, in that manner, or just in
Hmm.
general, I've seen this a lot in again, like, I'm still friends with a lot of powerlifters and stuff, and,
Sure.
um, powerlifters are powerlifters to me are a lot like rappers. When I was young, I used to shoot a lot of music videos when I lived out in
Okay.
LA. Uh, but there's a trope about rappers that they always make a big deal about they're going to retire. They'll tell everyone they're going to retire. They'll announce this next album's going to be my last album. And Jay-Z famously retired in like 2004. Uh,
Okay.
and
I didn't know
it,
that.
yeah, and he just keeps, because much
Coming
like
out of retirement?
yeah, much like powerlifters, rappers can't seem to understand that like you're probably going to live past 30. Like
Yeah.
you're not an old man yet. You're probably going to want to keep doing the things
Right.
that you do. Um, but so I've seen that many times over with powerlifters where uh, they, they have their retirement, and then the bug gets
Mhm.
them again, and they come back, and you know they say, I'm just gonna recreationally lift, and many of them completely fall apart without the structure of it. But some of them, their recreational lifting is still moderately structured, uh, and they, 6 months or a year later, find themselves sort of casually rolling up on the numbers that, like they're hitting second attempts, and they've come off of everything. They're like, they realize they're with sort of much less like psychological stress and effort. Like they tried to get away from it, but the strength just like came back, and
Right.
they return to competition, uh, hit new numbers, um, and then I think like the psychological stress mounts on them again, and sort of this idea of as soon as they tell themselves they're out of it, they allow
Mhm.
themselves just to enjoy the process of lifting, and without that psychological pressure, that like when they're in it, they're telling themselves, they're building up these numbers to be big and scary,
Right.
and to feel the expectations make it feel hard and stressful. They tell themselves it's getting hard, and so it becomes hard. They retire and tell themselves,
Mhm.
I'm just going to let lifting be easy now. And all of a sudden, the hard weights start to become easy again. And this ties into something else that I often talk about, like Pat Casey, and
Okay.
being the first man to bench press 600.
Right.
And
1967.
right. And back then, the idea that, that was as far, like that seemed far fetched, 60 years ago, 59 years ago.
Right.
The idea that like that a human could do that. And now, um, uh, you know, now you'll hardly get noticed on Instagram with a 600-pound bench in many cases. Um,
Well, yeah, that's debatable though. If you're doing raw, there's still gonna be only about, a dozen people or so in the world that can do it.
I mean, it's still a relatively small number, but the point being, as the raw number creeps up on 800,
Mhm.
uh, you know, Pat Casey, like if you dropped Pat Casey into today's world, where almost like the 4 minute mile, where
Roger Bannister, yeah.
yeah, where this number was sort of like, we take sort of these arbitrary numbers and we build them up and they become big and
Right.
scary. Um, and time progresses, and all of a sudden those numbers become more accessible. And eh, I'm I'm always convinced of, and again, it probably stems from like being around Louis, that idea that like again, it's we tell ourselves these numbers are hard, and we create these like glass ceilings for ourselves, and you'll look at something and go like, well, you progressed. Yeah, I see it all the time with kids. Like I'll have kids come in and go like, the first thing they want to do is like bench 225, and they will rock it from like 135 to 215.
Right.
And then as
Yeah.
soon as they get to like 215, suddenly they'll tell, we run a lot of like, we do a lot of brief maximal tension, 3 week undulating waves. And so
Mhm.
they'll be like one wave from getting it. It'll be like, oh, you did 215 for a double last week. So this week we're going to get 225. They won't show up. And they'll say, well, I just feel like I need to take a break. Like that
Oh,
number
yeah.
has become so big in their head, uh, you know, like it's or like listening to say like AJ Roberts, he trained under Brent Mikesell, and Brent Mikesell nearly killed himself trying to squat 1,200, and when AJ was squatting like 400, and then
Mhm.
AJ finally hits like 1,200 or 1,205. And as soon as he didn't even put the bar in the rack yet. And he said, like, I had no idea what to do after that. Like he couldn't imagine numbers like being bigger. And, like it was as though, I used to hike a lot when I lived in California. And
Which part of California?
I lived in I moved out there in 2009 for film. Um, and I lived in Burbank for like a year, and then I moved to Glendale for a couple years, and then I just kept moving like further and further east.
You were
So
training at the LA Lifting Club out there?
no, I wasn't training a
That
lot
was a
when I
gym
was
over
out
in
there.
Burbank. Okay, because Burbank had a pretty good gym out there. That's where Mendelsohn was training for a while. I
Hmm.
guess that would have been more like late 90s though.
Yeah. Um, but I ended up in
Yeah, I think you're right.
Pasadena
I
for
mean,
like 6 years.
standards rise. I mean, the rising, tide lifts all ships in this case for sure. I mean,
Hmm.
definitely with powerlifting is interesting too, is a lot of it is more of like life circumstances
Hmm.
or mental burnout or injury that stops people rather than it's not like, oh, like a lot of sports, like, oh, well, he's just one step too slow now, not like the old days. Powerlifting, it's not very rarely. I mean, it's so rare that I've seen someone just kind of go downhill slowly, like a physiological decline that's, except they just gotten older. It's usually like something bad happens, they lose interest or
Hmm.
just want to do something else.
Yeah.
It's not like you see a guy deadlifting 800, then 5 years later it's a 740 and it just keeps trickling down. I mean, I'm sure I've seen that a couple times, but it is so rare. It's not usually that stops people for
Hmm.
sure.
Um, but again, when things being true and repeating, I see on the other end of the spectrum um, with track athletes where like I've worked with kids where they start to get strong, and just as they're starting to get strong, and I never tell my kids that they're strong because like I'm friends with Dave Hoff, and I'm
Right.
like, well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
19-year-old Dave Hoff was weak compared to 34-year-old Dave Hoff. 19-year-old Usain Bolt was slow compared to
Sure.
28-year-old Usain Bolt. So I'm like, none of you are old enough that I'm going to tell you you're strong, because it's again to bring back the hiking analogy that I was starting and bailed on there. Uh, that idea of like, you know, when you're on your way up the mountain, all you want to do is get to the top. And when one of my favorite hikes in California, I can't remember it now, but you would get up over uh, one of those mountain ranges north of sort of like east of LA,
Okay.
and you'd hike for 3 or 4 hours, and you get to the top, and you'd be at the crest of this mountain ridge, and you'd look over and you'd see a valley, and off in the distance you'd see like the deserts north of LA, and all you'd
Mhm.
hear is like empty air. Like just
Okay.
with any hike you get, with anything in life, you get to what you think the top is going to be or supposed to be, and you get there and all you hear is just like rushing
Sure.
air, and it's like after a few seconds you're like, well, there's nothing really up here. And then all you want to do is get back to the parking lot, you know. But what I find in athletics, and especially in terms of like uh, strength or performance development, is people they get bored of hiking up the mountain, and they want a justification for being at the top. They hit this point where coaches hit this point routinely where they'll say, well, you know, he's getting strong, so now he needs to focus on like they as soon as they say he's getting strong and now he needs to focus, he doesn't get any
Mhm.
stronger, or he doesn't get meaningfully stronger. With track
Right.
athletes, it'll be, well, he's getting fast, so now we need to pull all these other things away. he's had this, meteoric progression. Now we need to pull out all these things that have been working, and we need to focus on, like, we need to create a top of the mountain. We need to create a point at which we cannot
Yeah.
hike any further up. Um, and oftentimes it's that same, like, either they build a number up. There's a kid locally in Tallahassee here, who I want to have his coach on at some point. I don't think I don't think his coach has any following or visibility whatsoever. But this kid went from like an 11.4 just a couple years ago to now he's run.
Mhm.
I think he ran 10.05 this year as a high school
Dang.
junior. Yeah, so he's like
Wow.
second. Yeah, I think he's the second or third fastest kid in the country this year. But he was relatively average just like 2.5 years ago. Um, and he had a big drop last year to like 10.6, and everyone was like, that's incredible. And then this year he came out and was like 10.3, 10.2, got a good tailwind and was, like sub 10.1.
Mhm.
But again, it's that thing of seeing, like, whether it's amateur power lifters who, like, in their mid 20s or early 30s will,
Mhm.
they go into the gym, they're in the rack, they're on the platform, like that's the little planet that they live on. They do
Right.
nothing else in any sort of eh, nothing else in any sort of movement plane, or they're relatively inactive outside of that, and they struggle forever to, like, hit a 500-pound squat or hit a 315 or a 405 bench. And meanwhile, like, a relatively mediocre high school football player who, like, has to go to
Yeah.
practice and then gets in the gym 2-3 times a week and just goes, balls out. They do their slow stuff, but then they have these other things that are making them have to run, have to jump, have to do, and the slow stuff just eases up so quickly, so easily, when that's not even really what they're concentrating on. Um,
Mhm.
and likewise, like, the track team will be like, "We need you over here," and as soon as they get over there, everything, it's like it becomes just frozen and it won't progress.
Yeah.
Um, so again, that's where yeah, seeing you post about rucking and stuff, it reminds me, it's like the same points of, I do it with the belted marching, or, when we had a belt squat in around like 2000, 2001, an ATP style. Uh, I think it was from like Legend maybe. Um,
Okay.
but we would do a lot of marching and stuff. We would do tons of sled work. I grew up with like strongman yokes in the backyard and stuff. So we always
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
had
totally.
always having sort of that element of, a lot of times, having, like, either as part of our warm up, which was really just because my dad had to wait until like the market closed to come train with us. So either we'd kind of like
Okay.
front load this sort of like GPP work, or we'd put it on, it would be tagged on to the back. But
Where'd you grow up at?
I grew up in Tallahassee.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up out here, went to Florida State, graduated, uh, went to Florida State for film, got kicked out of the film school, not for anything exciting, just massive budget cutbacks. Finished out
Oh,
through communications. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, finished out through communications. A real fun story with that I don't tell a lot is the sitting governor at the time, Jeb Bush, who slashed the
Yeah.
budgets. Also, through chance, like, I had met him. Um, he had run-ins with my family just around Tallahassee, playing like pickup basketball with my dad, or run-ins with my mom. He wrote a recommendation letter for me that helped me get into the film school. And
Yeah.
then he signed off on the budget cutbacks that got me then kicked out of the film school with a bunch of other kids. And then
Yeah.
many years later, I was doing a shoot with him. I got contracted to shoot this promo reel or something for him, and I took it solely to bring this up. And he was like, didn't you do film school or something? I was like, yeah. And he's like, how did that go? And I was like, not great, Jeb. Like, he's, I said, yeah, I got kicked out. And he was like, oh yeah, my brother had problems with school too. And I was like, no, that wasn't quite it. It was, budget cutbacks. And he was like, what year? And I said, well, it would have been the fiscal year of 2006. And I like hit him. He was like, that was my budget. And I was like, yep, that was your budget. Thanks, man. I was like, no, it all worked out though. I've made several movies since then. I'm fine. But I relish moments like that where I get to hold something over someone's head.
Does he still live there in Tallahassee?
No, he
Is he
he
still?
lives down. He and his wife live in. As soon as he was done and the governorship, he went back down to South Florida. So he's in, I want to say Boca, or at least
Yeah.
that's where he was
Okay.
in like 2018ish. But diving back into the isometric thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that whole idea of how you come back so quickly. And again, where
Yep.
this, I apologize because this is how my brain works. Again, tying back into seeing how this repeats. I had a conversation with Tony Villani about
Okay.
combine athletes and in their testing, and he said, when like kids come in from uh you know to prepare for the NFL combine, he said, like they can always roll, they can always hit these very impressive top speeds, but their acceleration struggles. And
Mm-hmm.
so sort of and with every, like, even the way that you're talking about doing the isometrics, you know doing the overcoming isometric and then following it up with some compensatory acceleration, um that
And you can do a lot with jumps and stuff too.
yeah,
You've done that too. I was talking more powerlifting conversation, but 100% works for that.
yeah, but just in general, that like there's a part of training that I think, especially on the powerlifting and sort of strength sports side, that people
Mhm.
sort of forget about or discount, which is uh, that idea of like that idea of learning and sequencing. So in the case of like, doing the heavy isometrics, the overcoming
Right.
isometrics, and you're lighting up all of your motor units. You're creating this immense force. You're training your body
Mm-hmm.
to create this force. And then you turn around and you're reinforcing like, hey, this is the thing that we need this force for. And this is the sequence or the coordination.
There you
Louis
go.
would always talk about coordination. Um, and some other people say sequencing, but that and
That
again,
concept, whatever we want, but yeah.
yeah. And so again, it's uh so for like the that power lifter, it's he understands that, like, that skill of sequencing,
Mm-hmm.
and he needs something that will build that force up. But like that skill, it's like that phrase, it's like riding a bike. That's literally what it is that coordination is this learned sequence and skill that even when you haven't done it for a long time, like, uh, um, you know,
Yes.
frustratingly, like my dad, who's, pushing 70 now, if we go out into the backyard and he picks up a basketball, he might not have shot for years. And he will probably, knock down a 3-pointer within a couple attempts. It
Yep.
just, he knows the sequence uh, to a greater degree than, say, I do. And I know that he'll listen
Well,
to
yeah.
this
I
at
mean,
some point and like that.
you're always gonna be drawing off things you've been previously exposed to, without a doubt. So yeah.
Yeah. But even in slow movements, that like
Mm-hmm.
that skill and that coordination. And then likewise in the fast movements, like those D1 receivers and DBs, they can roll, but why is their acceleration poor? Like it doesn't take as it's much less stressful to coordinate that early acceleration. But why? But they've seemingly forgotten how to do that, or that's how like people would look at it. But they haven't forgotten how to
Mhm.
run at top speed, which
Top
is
speed.
the more stressful coordination. And they haven't forgotten the acceleration either. It's just they've gotten weaker, coming out of the season. They once they're sort of given back that strength magically, they're these great accelerators again that match, because you can't learn that top speed unless you can accelerate up to it. So it's like at some point they had to be able to do that.
Right.
One doesn't magically follow the other. Um, Likewise, I don't think you'd find a lot of guys who. I'm really big on board pressing. Uh,
Mhm.
you don't. You'll find old guys who can board. I'm now turning into one of them where I can handle 400 or 500 pounds easy off of boards. Uh, and all my kids think, wow, I must be like a 500-pound bencher, because they can only handle, like if a new football player comes in with me, he probably can't hit off of a two or, even a four board what he can hit off of his chest, like
Right. It's just
until
different.
he's
You're never.
started to develop it. But once you've developed it, you can come back to it like years later and you sort of remember how to get into that groove and how that works. Um, but anyways, that's just fascinating to me. So the how do you balance these all of these sort of elements within, say, like what does a week of training sort of look like for you with let's say, like who's the most what's sort of the genre, I guess, that right now you would get most excited to train, or that you focus on most, and how would a week lay out for them?
I would say a strength athlete or a tactical athlete for sure. So it would really a lot of it would come down to what the priority is. So for example, if we're just kind of like trying to balance everything, so to speak, a lot of times what I also do would be not necessarily tied down to a week. We might
Mhm.
put it over like 8 to 9 days, especially if somebody's schedule allows for it. Because a lot of times, what would happen is, for example, if
Do you do that because of
somebody
age with that? With
or
that?
just needing to get everything
Mhm.
potentially, or because they need to get everything end. So like if we're gonna do like and then it also would depend, like because a lot of times, let's just say for example, we're doing some strongman stuff. You have access to the strongman stuff because it's in your uncle's barn and everybody meets over there Wednesday night. We don't have a lot of flexibility there. It is what it is. So that's where like everybody squats on Monday. Why? Because we spot each other, this, that, and the other. So we have to do that. So that's generally why a week's a good thing to do, because the rest of the world runs off of it. So we kind of got to get on
Mhm.
the program here for when stay in line. But if that's not the case, you're just like stationed wherever you can do it whenever, then we can spread it across, multiple days. I'll pull up something here right now for me to kind of go over.
Yeah.
So you saying like a tactical athlete, more so of somebody that's like kind of balancing everything?
Yeah, I just want to see how does m- how your um what you're prioritizing to get in, how you sort of make it fit and flow and work.
Right. So I'll give you an example of somebody. So here's pulled up. I always say I don't have an exact system. I customize it to every. I'm not like I do sell like programs online that would be like, okay, like this is the goal. Here's what to do, and follow that exactly, or work with people, one on one. A lot more of what I do. So, like for example, I'll give you a goal. This is a guy. If a guy here is in special forces, this guy,
Mhm.
he's somebody that would get like pretty good endurance without having to really push it,
Mhm.
and he wants to get stronger just because he prefers like power lifts and things like that versus so like he goes on one day, he's going like heavy bench press workout with, a med ball chest pass to kind of as an explosive potentiation thing before he goes into the bench press workout, and all the works upper back, triceps, that stuff, some push-ups at the end because he's gonna have to do that as part of his test. Day 2, we would go into some dumbbell jumps,
Mhm.
Zercher squats, trap bar deadlifts, again, corresponding accessory work. Day 3 would be like some tempo runs. So he's going 18 100-yard tempo runs, completing each one in 20 seconds, resting 60 seconds between them in this case. Then after that, he does what I call like aerobic agility. So you're on like a back pedal, side shuffle, forward, back, that kind of thing at
Mhm.
about 75% of your max speed. So you do that for, you do that, rest 30 seconds, do it again. So it's enough to like, it's not like he's actually going full out, but it does keep that kind of being able to change direction, but he doesn't have to do it full speed. The
Mhm.
day 4, he'd be into like, we're doing like a log press, incline press is a little more submaximal this day. Again, upper back, usually just like every day, some kind of neck work pretty much every day. And then day 5 would be like a little more strongman stuff like walking lunges, backward sledge drags, suitcase carries, some snatch grip shugs, and some other accessories. Then day 6 would be an hour ruck. And that's a
Mhm.
case of somebody that's actually in pretty decent shape that doesn't need to push the aerobic, wants to push the strength hard and the explosive stuff. So a lot of these guys that, if they do it with good intention, we get a lot out of a little, for example, like 10 dumbbell jumps to kind of warm up for the squat or potentiate the squat workout, had a
Mhm.
huge carryover. Like this guy, literally, he's 5'10". He just sent me a video of him dunking just for fun,
Mhm.
but it's not like just a special forces guy that's not like a D1 athlete, so like that's the
Yeah.
kind of it's got kind of benefit for him by getting stronger and minimum jump. I mean, I heard Louis Simmons talk about that one time too, was talking about like if some of these NFL combine guys would come, they would jump 40 times twice a week. That's
Mhm.
pretty high volume, but then they really didn't do anything else except they do linebacker drills at Ohio State once a week or something. And then they're, 40 drop by 3/10 of a second kind of thing.
Yeah. What's
So
that? It's
that
that.
would be
I was gonna say it's that
Jay,
same
right.
idea that like they know how to sprint. Now it's just they know how to do all these things. Now it's just giving them greater relative strength. More horsepower in the car. uh, You know, it. You can take the car out and drive the car more. You're only going to get so much faster from learning to drive the car better. Like those gains are going to
Absolutely.
evaporate. Like you're going to hit a brick wall in terms of progression super fast. From there, the
Mhm.
scalable attribute becomes the force production, especially in a relatively short distance, especially in something that's so acceleration heavy. Um,
Yeah, so, basically what I'd say is I don't have, like, so if you're saying, like, it's not like the conjugate exactly where you're at, like, your max effort day, speed day, upper,
mhm,
lower, that kinda thing. I have a lot of different I always say, like, I don't have an exact system. I learn from everybody, customize the situation. So, if you look at different programs, you see a lot of commonalities, but it's gonna come down to a lot of, not just what so I'm not generally doing, like, you're doing, like, group of like I did at Kennedale when I was strength coach there, of,
mhm,
like, 60 people in the weight room at once. What's the best overall for this group? And, like, a lot more of it's customized now. So what I'll do is, when I go on like Train Heroic or write books or whatever and make these programs, kind of look at what works a lot and then kind of make it for this situation. Like, okay, here's your 4-day week strength program,
mhm,
and optional if you want to get conditioning, here's 2 optional rucking days, things like that. So, because I do remember when I was at, Kennedale, when basically finally got 1 year there, really good, um, guy that helped with the off season named Jeff Lofton. He's a head coach somewhere out in West Texas at Amarillo now, really good coach. He was super helpful. For a lot of people didn't really know very much. So what I'd have to do there is those situations like, 60 people in the weight room. If, I'd obviously tell them how much to lift and that kind of thing. And what I used to do is artificially inflate maxes and stuff. So, okay, your max is, if we're going to have a spreadsheet of like, whatever, you're doing 5 reps at 80%, Your max is
Mhm.
300. Well, that moved pretty damn easy. So now your max is 315. You don't know what your max is. You just know on the board what you have to lift kind of thing. So that's been the main difference is being able to really lately like customize to people's situations
Mhm.
more than like, I'm going like, okay, most people need this, so this is what we're going to focus on. It's a different situation. I don't know how it is where you're at, but a
Mhm.
lot of times I was running like with football and stuff, 50, 60 people in the off season with a lot of the other coaches they're good football coaches, but I don't really know at that point, like except for that new guy, I don't think anybody really even trained at all themselves. Like, not like they trained and were weak. Like, I mean, I don't think they even so much as like walked laps for exercise, let alone done anything hard. So a lot of it's becoming all right. Well, you're a cop. You need to make sure people aren't jacking around
Mhm.
and they have the correct weight of the bar. That's your job.
Yeah.
And
How
it's the thing.
different are the sort of individual variances? Like, do you find that it's just mostly like sort of a few different archetypal things, and do people's programs tend to migrate towards like uh eventually I'm in no way, shape, or
What we
form
look at is
painting this
basically,
as laziness or anything on your part. I'm saying, like, do people eventually sort of progress to like a common set of strengths in an ideal world, or do they
I would say
stay?
definitely in an ideal war, depending what they need to do. You know what I mean? So like, I'd say there was like what you were saying earlier about there being like, kind of essentially we were saying is, I don't really phrasing, but kind of like bringing your biggest gun to battle versus, so you're like, you're getting stronger, then you stop getting stronger. Why?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I would agree with you for the most part. The thing I would say is at some point, strength may not be the thing they need the most. It's not that you don't want
Hmm.
to, it's not like if you, again, we hypothetical person,
It's
I
not
know
their
you like
relative
hypothetical.
weakness anymore.
Right. Your hypothetical thing is what? The guy that squats 600 that weighs 180 but runs a 6 flat 40. I was listening to a couple of your podcasts the
Hmm.
other day, and like that hypothetical guy that's super strong
Oh
pound for
yeah, yeah,
pound but can't run. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but and so we're doing another hypothetical. You got this guy that deadlifts 700 pounds and he weighs 180.
Hmm.
Conventional raw deadlift. Like, if he's a tactical athlete, like, is it going to be bad if you up to 800? No, it's not bad. It's just like, is that's what's needed at this point? Should that energy be allocated? Because you have to look at also a lot of the tactical guys is, I mean, you use a combine the same way as,
Hmm.
you know, sometimes it's about increasing the measurables for a promotion. So like you could be maybe going to the NFL draft. And if you're like on the line, if your measurables are good, you pass the bus test, as I say it, you like look the part and you have good measurables, I think that could potentially push you over the edge. If
Hmm.
you were, getting splinters in your butt from riding the pine, you're jacked and you run a 4.2, I don't think that's going to matter, but like if you're
Hmm.
like right on that line, it certainly pushes you over. Same thing with tactical guys of like, you may need to like to hit like, to get to special force selection or something. It may like there's occupational demand,
Hmm.
like work with all or SWAT team here. There's occupational demand, and then it ends, and then there would be, what you have to do to advance in your career for the test. Because like, you know, when I did the ISSA tactical course, wrote that, I what I did is instead of saying, all right, I'm not gonna look, I don't care what my opinion is on this. Let's just ask people, not people I've worked with only, just send it out. I talked to the head of the union at the Fort Worth Police Department, and he just started sending it out to surveys. So how far have you ever ran? The reality is like, I think it was like, 93% have never been on foot pursuit over like 200 yards, it sounded like.
Hmm.
But they're testing them in like 2 miles. So like, okay, let's just say you can run, because training's highly specific. You want, like we are talking
Yeah.
about earlier, you want to be a good generalist to maximize specific adaptations, of course. But another guy I work with ran, one of those things, I forget the name for it, but it's like an ultra marathon, but till you drop kind of thing. Is like you go like you just keep going for forever kind of thing. It's like 150 miles or something like
Hmm.
that. So and I don't, the pace is like under 7 minutes for all that. But it's what you run a mile in, and he ran a mile And he's like, I don't know. I'll just find out. 5:31. I thought he was going to be like, you know, 4:10 or so. I mean,
Right.
but the point being, it's a highly specific adaptation. So just because, let's just say you can max out the mile in 2 miles in 13 minutes. I mean, cool, but like, are you ever going to actually chase someone if you're on the Fort Worth SWAT team for 2 miles? You won't.
Mhm.
They would use like, they'd have assistants, dogs, something, give up on it the next day, whatever. Like, you're not going to be chasing people around for 2 miles. But the reality is, even that, for, like, it's really going to come down to, like you're saying, acceleration and sprinting, and like the reality would be, if you want to make this like legit, it'd probably be like maybe like one top end 40-yard dash or less, and then like some kind of repeat sprint thing of like, okay, can you do this over and over? Because you have to stop, start kind of thing. So
Mhm.
there is looking at, with any of these people, are we looking at maximizing job performance, or are we looking at, displaying these qualities in some sort of like fitness test you need to pass?
Mhm. So it's very much like the
So I do
combine.
think it's exactly like the combine.
It's
And then
train
it's why
for
stuff's
a
not that
sort of
hard.
arbitrary test and then turn around and train for the job that you actually are trying to get.
Right. And so that was pretty cool, is they're doing more stuff now of like at the Fort Worth SWAT. I've talked to them a little bit and consulted with them on them. They're just a little more of like an obstacle course. We're actually carrying like some heavy stuff upstairs, and shorter duration, but more intense.
Mhm.
So like a lot of that's finally starting to change. And I think you are with the military too, is, the Secretary of Defense is on, X benching 315. So that's where the last, guy looked like he had, one foot in a grave and the other on a banana peel. And didn't look like any kind of physical capability. And so I think that's kind of good thing that you're starting to see a lot of these tests move that direction,
Mhm.
because what are you actually going to face? I get they have to have something. Probably a lot of it's, I would assume. What do you think? It's like a screening process of like, okay, you can't just hook your buddy up with a job, because at least you have to meet this arbitrary standard to show you've done something to get there. The
Mhm.
combine, I don't know. So that seems, a little archaic, the way they do it, but you'd think there'd be some. I guess it's just the thing of like ease, right? Like, a military always say, why run? Why not just do a ruck? Well, okay, it
Mhm.
sounds good on paper, but then all of a sudden, you have 500 rucks lined up, that kind of thing. It doesn't. We're like running a couple miles is a heck of a lot easier to track, where
Right.
everybody's got access to a bench press. If you say, all right, well, when you impact the sled and do this, like, okay, yeah, it sounds good, but like, that's going to be a pain in the butt. So I think maybe, some kind of OVR model for combines eventually would, maybe, I don't know what it would be, but it'd be better than what they got now.
Yeah. I've made one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know in the instance of the NFL and the combine. So again, long ago when I was out in LA, I worked for NFL Network and I did combine coverage for a few years, and specifically I worked on like Mike Mayock's show and putting together reports and highlights and stuff of like 400 plus athletes, mostly
Yeah.
like any lineman and any quarterback for like a 3-year span. It was like I did their materials for that. Um,
Okay.
but I know in that case, there's the very real thing of all of their models. you know, the NFL is weird in that uh, it's a bit like Moneyball, where like if you ever saw the movie for that, like where
Mhm.
you had like your Jonah Hill, like an economist, or
Okay.
like a mathematician, a statistician, someone who probably never played the game, but they're just looking, they're just good at drawing information from correlations. And then you had
But
the scouts who like had played the game, like they understood the game side of it, but had extreme biases. And then you had, you know, Brad Pitt, the Billy Bean character, who had been a scout, had been the player,
yeah.
and then was open minded enough to listen to the analytics. but was seemingly like you needed that sort of bridge component that understood enough in each direction to kind of see the blind spots. And with, in like college recruiting, and this is changing now as everything's restructuring, but how the NCAA has it is like it's the guy who's a position coach on Saturday is
Mhm.
responsible for recruiting and ultimately like sort of checking
Right.
off and signing off on guys on Friday night. And
Yeah.
he's going to keep his job he's going to get rewarded for having a better recruiting class. And so what he does on, Friday night, who he scouts and who he chooses, but ultimately he's there because he wants to move from position coach to coordinator to head coach.
Right.
He doesn't want to be a scout. And in the NFL, they've got these tranches of just scouts and statisticians. But then there's this disconnect with all of them of they don't know how easy it is to, like, with the right guidance, get a guy to gain some weight and get faster, to get like how easy it
Right.
is to manipulate that stuff. So they think that all that stuff is very rare when the
But
sort of reality
it's so
becomes like guys who can play and who have that skill
yeah.
base and that tactical knowledge are probably the most rare.
What about yeah, for sure. And what about, I always wondered if it was a marketing thing too, of like, kind of thing of like, you got some middle-aged dude at, bar in Wisconsin, like watching these guys bench. He's like, well, I can hit, 225 for 20 reps. So kind of like give them like an interest in it to kind of think they could be there too. Sort of like, I
I
think it
don't
was
having
like
worked
people the marketing, what's the marketing thing of people, I think it was Trump's book before, well, long before he's president, of Art of the Deal, is he talks about like how people like playing to a fantasy. And I'm wondering if there's some sort of like fantasy thing of like, oh, well, because you look at like some of this stuff so far out of people's realm of like run
Mhm.
a mile in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Well, when I was in great shape, I did it in 8 minutes or something. Someone watching it, well, I could do 225 like that. So it's like sort of like this fantasy that gets you engaged and watching it. I don't know. Just sort of
Yeah,
like the
I
King
don't
of Queens show, that fat
uh-huh.
guy picks up the, hot girl.
Yeah.
So
Well,
all those guys are watching the show, like thinking that could be them. I don't know.
yeah. I don't think in regards to the NFL,
Mhm.
I think that if that was the route they wanted to go, there
Mhm.
would be such easy ways to get there and be more effective at it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what people don't understand is like, when all those stat nerds, when they make their models, those models and the greatest indicator of future success is past performance. So when they look at, well, here's the statistical model of a successful pass rusher, for example. Like they're going to create this model, and that model is based on the decades of dudes who have already gone through.
Right.
And so they're afraid to change their like the data points moving forward because again, they don't understand, like I would look at it and be like, well, the vertical jump tells you this much.
Mhm.
And really like, yeah, why are we looking at 40s? Why is the noisiest part of a 40 is 0 to 10, especially the way that the NFL does it. And people forget things like, the whole reason they put their hand down into a 3-point stance is because they wanted to see in the 80s how fast were wide receivers. And people forget now that like prior to the sort of popularization of bump and run coverage in the late 80s, I mean, like you can find like Jerry Rice tape where he's got his hand in the dirt in a 3-point stance, like as the like
Right.
Y or Z receiver, like being, that outside receivers would get down in these sort of modified. That's what the 40 stance was originally. It wasn't a track
Mhm.
stance. It was, we
Okay.
want to see how fast these wide receivers come off the line. But they don't come off the line that way anymore because someone realized if we line a DB up in front of them, they can't do that. Now they come out of 2-point stances. So
Yeah.
it like it's this technique that they learn for this one job interview that does not transfer over to anything else ever. And but the whole problem is that all of their data models are built on grading it against in terms of the NFL Combine, like since 1987, it's not that many. It's roughly 250 people a year, and you're trying to build data models for you know 22 different positions on the field, and each team has different archetypes of it. So when you make a switch, it might be like well reasoned, but the part that everyone loses is that once you make that
Mm.
switch, you've cut yourself off from all that instructive data from the
That
past
makes sense.
generations. Yeah. So they're
Yeah, no, I
scared
never
to
thought
change
about that.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
no, that
scared to
makes
change
sense.
for those reasons. They haven't, like eh, people say like, "Oh, it's the marketing stuff." It's like in the scheme of things, it gets terrible ratings. No one really watches the combine.
They
Like
don't?
it,
I
not
didn't.
really. Like it's decent ratings for NFL Network, but it's not like it's not big money. Like it's
Okay.
they could make it a much bigger and better show. I proposed a bunch of this stuff in like 2011, and people did not like it, but they could make it a better show, and they could really produce it and treat it as more of an actual live event. Um,
I wonder
but
why they weren't interested in it because, I mean, it's all about revenue and stuff for them. So, like, I mean, what do you got to lose
it's a
if it
very it's a very small, and in terms of I'm saying this in terms of like philosophically, in terms of like just embracing change, it's a very small and very conservative like
okay,
structure. So they
got it.
it's not real imaginative, and then the production side of it and the actual like uh, you know the scouts just want to scout. The GMs don't want it to be a show. Uh,
Okay.
and the network sort of arm of it, like when I worked there, I'm 6'3", 250-ish. Like
Yep.
I played when I was younger. I grew up playing high school ball against guys like Antonio Cromartie, LeGarrette Blunt, Ernie Sims,
Okay.
like that sort of early 2000s, in Tallahassee. Tallahassee was loaded back then. Um, but at the NFL Network, I was an oddity in terms of working on, like the guys who looked like they played football wore suits and
Mhm.
sat in front of the cameras.
Oh,
Everyone
wow. Okay.
else, everyone, and that's how just Hollywood in general is, and like TV production and stuff. There's it's and I built my entire career in that space off of being the athlete.
You got a sort of interesting resume here. OVR, it's high school strength coach,
Yeah,
filmmaker. It's
I yeah.
yeah.
I also I my first film, and by far the actual most successful thing I've been a part of, was a vegan documentary. Um, so
Okay.
Forks Over Knives, back in like 2010. And that was the first project that I worked on. But yeah, so
Okay. Cool.
I'm a weird spacey. This is why I talk in all over the place. Like it's hard to keep me on one sort of path. Um, but yeah, the military side is different because like sort of the incentives to create like a good test. I don't imagine that there's the
Right.
same sort of pressure from like in essence like a scouting department that's like, well, no, if we change that test, then how are we going to know where to draft Johnny? And it's like, like they should be in theory like freer to at least
Yeah. I don't
experiment
know
to
what
try to make something better.
I don't know what initially, like, I think, like, what was it, 2019 or something? They changed the armies quite a bit
Hmm.
and got better. And then it kind of got to it kind of got I think what they initially had planned, a lot of people weren't doing as well as they thought they would, so they had to kind of loosen it up a little bit, or have
Mhm.
not as many people in there. So I think they've done a
Yeah.
better job of it lately.
Yeah.
Because
What are the first, um, I think, like, yeah, even what you're bringing up, like, the, people in 2026 are largely unprepared for, like, physically unprepared for anything. Like, y the adults of
right,
2026 are like the the young people of the 20 teens, and they're in worse shape than, like, my generation was, and my generation was in worse shape than every generation is getting heavier
yeah.
and
And
weaker
I wonder when that
simultaneously.
started. When do you think that started?
I think so, again, tying these weird backgrounds that I have together, um, I think that started really, I've looked at, like, injury charts, and in the early 80s, prior to the early 80s, all injuries seemed to be relatively flat. From, like, 50s, 60s, 70s into the early 80s, things like ACL, UCL, Achilles, looking sort of at, like, those big three,
Mhm.
is that the NBA these days is really preoccupied with
Right.
Achilles. NFL is concerned about Achilles, but also just knee injuries in general. And then MLB with, like, UCLs.
Mhm.
If you look at these charts laid over top of one another, like, the numbers change, the scale sort of changes, but the shape of the charts are in essence the same. When one league has a spike over a few years of one type of injury, the others
Mhm.
have similar spikes over the other injuries. And so everyone wants to look at, like, well, what can the game do? And in my opinion, it's like, well, the game is catching it way too late. It's
Yeah.
it's what's happening beforehand. And so if you look at, like, I've looked at combine data for, like, high school combines, and from 2013 to 2023, um, the average kid got slightly faster when you look at just the average, the big number. But when you started to look at, uh, they got, or no, they got slightly slower. They got 5/100ths slower
Same
on
with
the 40.
I just read about that the other day on baseball too.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
getting the
Texas.
kids
So
are getting slower. I can tell from,
just
just
your best or better, but your median and down or not.
right. They were twice as likely to run sub 4.6. They were four times as likely to run north of 6. And so, yeah, even, like, I've looked at state weightlifting data for Florida, and, again, records get broken every year, but, like, the sixth place, the 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 sort of, like, lower places scoring points, if you just looked at that as a threshold, that has gone down year over year for 2 decades. And the first signs that I could see, like, of things changing were in the early 80s, this slight uptick. And then in the mid 90s, a more pronounced uptick, but still by today's standards would be, like, so minimal. And
Yeah.
then in the 2000s, another big pronounced uptick. And then the mid 2000s, like, things, or the teens, things started to go crazy. And now I'm terrified of what's going to happen. And I'm seeing it happen. Kids are notice. It's so much harder to keep kids from getting injured, these last few years. Like, the young kids coming in, like my senior classes, I'm like, y'all don't get hurt. Like, y'all are very
Yeah.
robust compared to, like, these middle schoolers. So I'm at a school that's K through 12, and just seeing, like, every year younger and younger kids having surgeries, they're coming in so much less prepared. But anyways, so between 2011 and 2021, I think, or maybe just 2011, 2023, But uh, ACLs in young athletes went up
Mhm.
11 times. UCLs went up 11
Okay.
times. Achilles injuries went up 11, like they all 11x'd, and screen time 11x'd. So
Hmm.
they're on mobile devices. So the cell phones, and it's essentially like you go to parks now. Kids aren't at the park. Kids don't go outside. Kids don't. So you think about like when they're young and their most adaptive years, they're less physical than ever. So they're coming out of that period of their life, with less. eh, They've accumulated like millions fewer ground contacts. They haven't been jumping off the swing set and everything. Like their bones are more brittle. They're weaker, and
Yeah.
statistically, they're heavier. So they constitute a larger stress on their own physical capacities, and then that just perpetuates out. And then like they hit eventually this buzzsaw of like travel sports, and sort of they get this huge spike of stress when sports get
And
serious.
one thing though, usually, right? Like it's not like it travels like we're traveling basketball then baseball. It's like they kind of
Yeah,
specialize in one thing.
it's they specialize in one thing, but even I think like even the multi-sport like discussions, like when I was young, we didn't have, I'm 39, so like
Okay.
uh I feel like I'm in this weird zone of, I feel at least young enough like mentally I feel young, my body's starting to feel old, but most days I feel like a young spry guy, and I'm around a bunch of kids, so that probably helps. But uh I definitely can see how vastly different their lives are. But like there's fewer and fewer fewer and fewer multi-sport athletes, but in my day I played everything.
Mhm.
Um but and I had this conversation with my dad, because my dad, when I was up until like high school, he like coached me and everything. And then he was, kind of let me go be coached by other people and sort of,
Yeah.
embrace the traditional system of development. But I played everything when I was younger. And I grew up around all these guys who, a lot of them were like first round draft picks, and they
Mhm.
played far fewer sports than me. They specialized much earlier than me. But in a time when everyone else was like, oh, it's football season, I play football. It's basketball season, I play basketball. It's track season. Like, you would pick one thing up, put everything else down. I started to notice like these kids who are really successful, like 4 and 5 star type athletes, they were actually
Mhm.
specializing. They were
But what
doing
age?
like middle school. They're like,
Yeah, see, I'm
but
talking like 8-year-old stuff though.
yeah, but yeah, and that's sort of getting at what I'm saying. Like they were, I grew up a relatively well off white kid on the nice part of town and stuff, and like uh, a lot of them grew up in the on the other side of town.
There's some rough parts. I've been to that Waffle House in Tallahassee. I was had
Yeah,
looking all around.
yeah, because you worked with Hornstra, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That
I
was
know
after going
Jeremy
to
a
the
little
gym,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, but I started to notice like from that like multi-sport development thing, me and a lot of my friends, we were like the poster children of that. But we never actually spent enough time in any one thing to develop any sense of like how, like we didn't learn the nuance of any one game.
Mhm.
Like we didn't actually develop at anything. And looking back and looking at like, well, Cromartie, he gave up basketball, and he never played really like 4 sports at any point. He gave it eventually was just football 3 quarters of the year, track sort of nominally. And but he was super active. And looking at like say the kids who grew up in my neighborhood, if they weren't playing a sport, they were on the couch.
Well, I
And
wonder if that's sort of the multi-sport thing to a degree, though. If they're doing other stuff, it's kind of like you're getting a lot of those benefits without an organizational system.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying is I think that for a lot of kids, like for young kids, sports are a lot of times just sort of another form of babysitting. And so like it's active babysitting. So like
That's very true.
when the in the like old system where sports were very seasonal, if you weren't playing multiple sports, I think you were just much less likely to be active. And now those kids are active year round, specializing in one thing, which I don't think is inherently problematic. I think the problem becomes they don't have coaches who are teaching them new things throughout the year. So they're just doing the exact same thing every day, and none of it is actually like they're not really being prepared for anything. Uh, Going back to again, almost like talking about the isometrics, like
Yeah, I get what
after
you're saying. Almost like a rush, like the Russians did. If they had like a, your volleyball, you'd be doing other stuff throughout the year. Even though you're specializing in volleyball, you'd just be doing some other activities at times rather than just
yeah,
practicing volleyball.
yeah. But
And I think, yeah,
even if you had, it's the same as, you know, again, if it's true, it repeats. And if the whole formula is like represented, then it should repeat over and over and over again. But to look at training, because for many sports, training is the sport.
mhm,
If you're around a high level like Olympic lifting coach or powerlifting, like I'm sure that if someone goes and trains with you, you have
mhm.
probably years of conversations and tips and point, like you have
Right,
something
right.
that you can teach every day, and that act of teaching changes, like specificity and variation they're not real, because even if you're doing the same sets and reps, your firing pattern is actually slightly different every single rep. You can't even control it. There's variation is built into the system. However, if you're not sort of like mentally engaged and participating in it, then you lose the effect of it very quickly. But if you're like, on fire for whatever it is you're doing, you could do
Right.
a very simple program for a long, long time and continue getting benefit out of it, because you're still like, you know, you're you're picking up and learning from like the
Yeah, for
nuances
sure.
between sets, you know. So I think like I think that people they look at things as like if they have the same labels, then they must be the same thing. And the reality is like the execution.
For sure.
Yeah, you could write down your system on paper. You know, Louis wrote down everything. Like he gave everyone the template, and very few people could get anything approximating his results. And he would say, like, I had this conversation with him many times where he'd say, like, I don't understand why, like why people can't get this. I go, like, because 99% of it isn't on that paper. Like, that paper is like the
Sure.
schedule of what we're doing today, but then in between,
What's
like,
your intent with the execution? Yeah, and then the in
yeah,
between and all that.
yeah,
Lifestyle, everything.
yeah, he's prepping guy, like, and every, I've worked with like a long jump coach before who the workout was 9 jumps and it took 2 hours. And in between each jump was like a 10-minute conversation. And the conversation was about like, all right, on this jump, you're going to do this and you're going to feel this start to happen. And when you feel this, that's when you're going to respond with this. And the guy went up every single jump and ended up hitting. This is an Olympian, and he hit a PR at the end of on his 9th jump.
Wow.
But it was every rep. The coach, because the coach had been to 4 Olympics, he was every rep.
Mhm.
He was like, okay, I taught you that. Now I've got the next sort of chapter. And it's like, you couldn't write
Right.
a book that way. The book would confuse everyone. You could only meet the athlete like in those moments in between. But it's a sort of that idea of like the isometrics. It's like if the isometrics, if you could find a way that they continued teaching something
Mhm.
after 6 weeks, then it'd probably keep working. But either mentally, like there's nothing left. It's like you solved the problem to the degree that that tool can do it. So now You have to find another problem, or you
Yeah,
just
at
have to
that point,
find
it'd
a
be more
tool
just
that takes it to the next level.
or more than likely, there's something else that needs to be solved at that point too, because theoretically, you've rectified that.
Right. Um, but so yeah, so the whole I
It's a
think
cat with
that
that those lips, cat and mouse game. Once you get something figured out, you have to figure something else out
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And even Louis got frustrated like with like Hoff down the because I was there like as Hoff was sort of uh
Mhm.
reascending at the tail end of his time at West Side. Um and like the sort of constant back and forth between him and Louis was that like he would be like, I'm running into problems that Louis has never solved before. Is like Louis had a big squatter before, but he wasn't a big bencher. And he's never had someone who was big at all three lifts and trying to do them all in the same meet. He's like, I can't solve things in this vacuum that Louis does. So he would go to
Well, anytime you're going to like a level that no one else has been to, you're going to deal with things that no one else has dealt with before. Certainly,
yeah. Um uh,
yeah, that's part of the game. Hmm.
yeah. But yeah. So with I mean I could talk like this for hours. Yeah, I guess this is probably a good point to land the plane because anything else is just
Mind
going to
it.
be another hour from there. But yeah, I guess this has been wonderful, and I've enjoyed talking to you thoroughly, and I hope that we get to do it a lot more here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I've liked your stuff. I for some reason thought your name. Called you Thomas Fay because I got that book by him. But yeah, I've
That's
followed your
fine.
stuff for a
I know
while
several
now.
Thomas Fays, so that's
Yeah, no, and I followed your stuff for a while, liked it, and I definitely felt like this was good learning experience discussion for me too. It wasn't just me ranting and raving. It was very good back and forth, so I enjoyed it.
yeah.
We'll definitely do it again.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you, and what do you have? What do you want to point people to now?
You can find me on X at Josh Strength or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. On Facebook, Josh Strength Method. On Instagram, Jill Strong. Easiest way is probably on my website, joshstrength.com. Just contact me through there. Of I'm a I do online have online coaching services through there, and then some pre-made programs and books and things like that. So, and then that's about what I got.
All right. Well,
All right,
sweet.
well, appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
This. All right, man. So this has been another
Cool.
episode of Burn the Ladders, and we will see you next time.
Okay.